We are at the bye week, preparing for week 6 of the A7FL season, and we've got some questions, we need some answers, but let's set the scene for the final few weeks of our regular season with our top 7 stories so far. And the first one, the Midwest merging with the Eastern Conference. The 2025 season began with a major shift for both the Indianapolis Octane and QC Crush, as they would become the newest members of the Eastern Conference after only joining the East during the national playoff bracket in 2024. The Crush started the season with outsized expectations, as some prognosticators saw the combination of Keno Thomas, Trey Brooks, Amatrice Hall, and other bright spots of past Ohio clubs would be enough to contend with some of the heavy hitters in the Eastern Conference. They would get that kind of gut check in the opening week of the 2025 season, as they would throw off against the Silk City Animals, who made their first trip to the Midwest to start 2025. David Tender and company wasted little to no time establishing the tone, as the Crush would be left to fall to 0-1. For the Octane, it would be a contentious 21-13 loss to the returning Old Bridge Hawks, as Amir Morris and Corey Hammond would lead the way on the road. The Crush would find themselves competing and even leading against the defending Eastern Conference champion Trenton BIC in a wet and wild Week 2 showdown at home in Cincinnati, but would find themselves on the other side of Trey Robinson and Sterry Codrington creating chaos on both sides of the ball, dropping them to 0-2 against the consensus favorites to come out of the Eastern Conference. After collecting back-to-back wins against the Octane and not able to keep pace with a fully healthy East Orange Renegades squad, they now face a Patterson U team who also need to step up after losses to the Animals and the BIC, but more on Patterson later. They face off in our national game of the week this Sunday on Fox Soul, Triller TV Plus, Fight 24/7 by Triller, and internationally on DAZN and also on A7FL.TV. For more information on the games, you can head on over to A7FL.com/watch. Our number 6 story takes us to East Orange, as the Renegades and new general manager Ron Clerk, along with the partnership with New Jersey flag icons TMU, look to turn things up in 2025. And on opening day, that tone was immediately set, as they and the defending Eastern Conference champion Trenton BIC would take the game into overtime. And if it weren't for a drop championship point, the trajectory of the 2025 season could have been thrown off before we even got in the air. From there, the Renegades were on the run from the law, as they were on the road to Cincinnati, walking out, leaving the Octane on blocks 34-14. The next week under the lights against a fellow Jersey team with high hopes and eyes on redemption in 2025, the Old Bridge Hawks would find their wings clipped by Anthony Service, Corey Price, and a hungry defense, as the Renegades would get to 2-1. But the specter of that Week 1 overtime loss to the BIC would come to haunt the Renegades in Week 4, as they would find the Baltimore Watchmen squeaking out a 25-24 victory in a Game of the Year contender you can watch anytime on demand at A7FL.TV, or find out where you can watch it on demand at A7FL.com/watch. Holding a 3-2 record walking into Week 6 and only a matchup with the DC Buzz in our final week of the regular season, the Renegades seem to have momentum and skill, but will that be enough once they're a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference playoffs? We're going to find that out when action kicks off in our A7FL playoffs starting on March 18th. Speaking of the playoffs, when the 2025 season started, many insiders looked at this to be a defining year for one of the league's greatest clubs in the Patterson U, as following a loss in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Trenton BIC and missing their second straight A7FL title game, the team teetered on either one last run or the start of a complete rebuild. But no signs of a rebuild in Week 1, as they would walk out as the 50 Boys in DC, winning 52-14 over the Buzz. But just 1 week later, during one of the most anticipated games on the 2025 schedule, it would be the Patterson U getting waylaid on the Atlantic coast, as the Animals would get their first ever Battle of Patterson win 64-38 over the U. with Quattrell Huffin, the franchise and all-decade quarterback for the U, suffering a second injury in as many seasons that would see him miss significant time, it would come down to a rotating lineup of quarterbacks, including former college standouts Ron Butler and Kareem Williams, to get it to players like Haas Dubois and find themselves close, if not. Another year, another controversial BICU matchup would see the U fall to 1-2. Now with the win over the Octane and a showdown with the Crushing the Hawks on the horizon in week 6 and 7, the U have 2 chances to set themselves up to get on a late run and show that the 3-time champions have a shot at aiming at number 4. When we return here on A7FL in Motion, we'll take a look out west as the Insomniacs look for a historic 3rd title. The A7FL rookie and sophomore classes look primed to take over the league, and we've got more after this. It's A7FL in Motion. Stay right where you are. It's week 6 and we're on to Cincinnati as the A7FL Games of the Week return to the Midwest. Don't miss a moment as the Patterson U and the QC Crush battle for positioning in the Eastern Conference playoffs. Can Trey Brooks, Keno Thomas, and Amatrice Hall have some home cooking and walk away with the biggest win in franchise history, or will big play Haas Dubois and company find a way to get the win? Find out how to watch us live or on demand by going to a7fl.com/watch. Welcome back to A7FL in Motion. I'm Matt Ryan, and we're looking at the top 7 stories so far of the A7FL's 11th season. And at the 4th spot, we head down I-95 to Baltimore as the Watchmen, who were denied in 2024 but got as close as the Eastern Conference Finals in 2023, look to find themselves as the first Baltimore team to play in an A7FL title game since 2018. With both John Gauze and Rokeem Chaney alternating and running the offense and impressive work on all sides of the ball from Carlos Crosland, the Watchmen walked into Week 3's matchup with the Animals 2-0 after defeating DMV rivals the Buzz and the Heathens. While they would score more points against the Animals than they would against any opponent this season, it would be Baltimore's falling to Tender and company 58-32 in their Week 3 matchup. In Week 4, we'd see John Gauze Jr. return under center for the Watchmen and engage in a Game of the Year candidate on their home turf against Anthony Service and the Renegades, as the Watchmen would walk out in overtime 25-24 as they would go to 3-1 on the season. With a win over the Heathens in Week 5, the Watchmen ride into their final matchup against the BIC in Week 7 and may create chaos in our 2025 playoffs. We'll have more on that later in the show when Zach Morgan and Cole Gardella break things down regarding our impending postseason. But knowing how tough this Baltimore Watchmen franchise can be, they will be one of the tougher outs when we head into the A7FL playoffs starting on May 18th. And if you want to be a part of the action live or on demand, you can find out when, where, why, and how at a7fl.com/watch, or check your local listings where you're watching right here, right now. And as we head to our number 3 story, let's talk about the generations here in the A7FL. Because we've seen wave after wave of great athletes, but in the last 2 seasons, we've seen the rise of David Tender, Manny Diaz, Kwani Morgan, H3 Frazier, Zaire Hancock, and it's been doubled down. You've got Jimmy Flott from the East Orange Renegades. And let's talk about the East Orange Renegades when it comes to new players in this league, whether it's on the offensive or defensive line for the Renegades, or Anthony Service. He has become a surefire candidate for Rookie of the Year for how he's handled himself and gotten his team within one play, two plays of being not only undefeated, but defeating two of the top teams in this league. You have Damon Small, who is such a Swiss Army knife for the Renegades, whether it's at running back or receiver. You've seen him play on both sides of the ball. He has become such an effective weapon and such a bright spot for the Renegades. And then obviously you have the Silk City Animals. I've mentioned them before. Manny Diaz, who tied the modern record for touchdowns in a game alongside Kason Campbell last time we were with you on Games of the Week. And you have David Tender, who's trying to go stride for stride with Sterry Codrington for MVP or Offensive Player of the Year if either of them can beat out Diaz or Kason Campbell. And they have Kwani Morgan, who's such an X factor for the Animals in the backfield or on returns. And then you have Robert Long for Silk City, who has been such an impressive weapon in the defensive backfield. There's so many options, so many new young talents here in the East. But then you go out west, you have the new blood on the defending back-to-back national champions. You have Shannon Allen, a.k.a. Primer, the up-top god, Will Carswell, who had impressive showings against the Hunters in Week 5. And speaking of our back-to-back champions, the Las Vegas Insomniacs fall into the 2 spot as they continue to be the Doom Patrol out in the desert, having not only the second highest scoring offense in the league, but the stingiest defense in the A7FL. Over their first 4 games of the 2025 season, they've only given up 24 points. And with Anthony Wilkerson, Scooter Hamilton, Eric Schufer Jr., and the whole cast returning for another season, the only goal for the defending champs is to be the only team in A7FL history to go back to back to back, which has not been done, as we saw this past February, something not accomplished in modern football. But with the reaction coming from the Eastern Conference this year, and while the Insomniacs are near dominant, have to prepare for a more focused and potent opponent if they make it to June 22nd for the A7FL's 11th championship game. For more information on where to watch the A7FL Championship, our playoffs, or even our Games of the Week live or on demand, go to a7fl.com/watch. Our number one story is one that's been settled in one way, but has created more questions as the Trenton BIC and Silk City Animals took the mantle of the most talked about story and most talked about rivalry of the 2025 season. While it would be the BIC getting the win following a controversial fourth quarter, which you can catch on a7fl.tv or any of our partners by going to a7fl.com/watch, there are many saying what if, as the defending Eastern champions would walk out of Week 5 with a 53-51 win over Silk City. But with a showdown with the Hawks and Heathens remaining on the Animals schedule, and the BIC playing host to the Baltimore Watchmen on the final day of the regular season, there is a chance that the Animals walk into the playoffs as the top seed in the East by virtue of a Watchmen win over Trenton. And while many are wondering what would happen if David Tender did not get hurt midway through their matchup with the BIC, or what would have happened if Trenton's fully staffed offense and defensive lines were in play, especially with the BIC bringing in 2023 Eastern Conference champions Mark Bagway and Deontay Henderson, along with the possibility of Bagway splitting time with Codrington not only at quarterback, but defensive back, any potential postseason matchup could break the scoreboard, or at least their last matchup as the game of the year for the 2025 season. When we return here on A7FL InMotion, Zach Morgan and Cole Gardella will break down the math behind the 2025 conference playoffs and give you some big stats before a big week right here on A7FL InMotion. Stay right where you are. It's week 6 and we're on to Cincinnati as the A7FL Games of the Week return to the Midwest. Don't miss a moment as the Patterson U and the QC Crush battle for positioning in the Eastern Conference playoffs. Can Trey Brooks, Keno Thomas, and Amatrice Hall have some home cooking and walk away with the biggest win in franchise history? Or will big play Haas Dubois and company find a way to get the win? Find out how to watch us live or on demand by going to a7fl.com/watch. Welcome back to A7FL InMotion. I'm Matt Ryan, and before we get to the stats, the facts, the figures, and the story that will lead us into the A7FL National Playoffs, let's give you a look at what's coming up in the A7FL in terms of the schedules for Week 6 and Week 7 as we get closer and closer to May 18th and the start of our national playoff. Coming off the holiday break, a few major teams are on the bye, including the Silk City Animals, the Trenton BIC, and the defending national champion Las Vegas Insomniacs. But our schedule takes us out west to throw off Week 6. The Vegas Gold and the Silver State Stealth, as both look to get one step closer to making it into the finals in the Western Conference. And speaking of consistent finalists in the Western Conference, sick with it. Look to continue their momentum after taking a loss to the Insomniacs as they battle the Vegas Hunters. That matchup taking place over at Matter Academy. For times and more information, you can go to a7fl.com/schedule. That's a7fl.com/schedule. But in Week 6 in the Eastern Conference, the battle for playoff positioning for 3 out of the 4 teams, and one team has a chance to play spoiler in Week 6. We head back. We're on to Cincinnati as the Virginia Heathens and Ryan Burrows, the Captain America USA rugby star, turned starting quarterback for the Virginia Heathens. Him, Marty Marcel and company make their way out to the Midwest as they battle an Indianapolis Octane team primed to play spoiler in their home market. But will they be able to stifle the rushing attack of the Heathens? We will find out on A7FL.TV internationally on DAZN. And you can find out how to watch those games live or on demand by going to A7FL.com/watch. And if you're watching us on Fox Soul, if you're watching us in Houston, if you're watching us on Triller TV Plus, Fight 24/7, or even on demand on Stadium, your game of the week this week has major playoff implications as the Patterson U, not knowing who's going to be their starting quarterback in their final 2 games of the regular season, and maybe even into the playoffs, Ryan Shamar and company will have to contend with a QC Crush team that is not only at home, but hungry for a season-defining victory and upsetting the apple cart and maybe hopping over the Patterson U in the path to a top spot in the playoffs. That will be our major game of the week. You'll be able to see that live or on demand in our Week 6 mega matchup and find out how you can watch those games live or on demand by going to a7fl.com/watch. In our final week of the regular season, though, it will be win or go home for several teams in the A7FL. Across the league, we will have games starting off with the Buzz and the Renegades, the Animals taking on the Heathens, the Hunters taking on the Silver State Stealth, and then, folks, the Watchmen and the BIC. That will be our final game of the week. Regular season broadcast of the season with the #1 spot in the Eastern Conference on the line. What will happen when those 2 teams face off? We also will see the Hawks take on the U, Gold take on Sick With It, and the Hunters take on the Silver State Stealth. And on May 18th is when the national playoffs will begin. So we're going to take a week off and be back on May 18th. And folks, in the opening round right now in the Western Conference, it will be the Gold battling Sick With It and the Hunters battling the Insomniacs. And we will have the Eastern bracket for you real soon. But let's break down the numbers, the math, the facts, and the figures that will get us to the national playoffs. Let's head on over to Zach Morgan and Cole Gardella.
Zach Morgan here with our lead statistician, Cole Gardella. We've had a crazy race so far this A7FL season for the playoffs. We now have 3 teams left fighting for that #1 seed between the Watchmen, the BIC, and the Animals. can you tell me what is each team's path to getting that number 1 seed?
They have varying degrees of difficulty to get that 1 seed. BIC have the simplest path to the number 1 seed. They just got to beat Baltimore in week 7. They clinch that number 1 seed with yet another perfect regular season for them. Watchmen could upset the apple cart by getting the 1 seed by beating BIC in week 7, as well as getting some help from the Animals' opponents by defeating the Animals in one of their last 2 games of the season. And then the Animals honestly have the most complicated path of the 3 teams remaining. They're going to need to win out and have Baltimore beat BIC in week 7. And at that point, we're going to have a similar situation to what we had in 2023 when the BIC, U, and Watchmen all finished with the same record, and they all beat each other in a type of rock, paper, scissors style. So that'll come down to what we call power points in the A7FL, where it basically just goes through all of the team's victories and determines how strong of a victory they were by the opponent's records that they actually beat in those games.
We've seen some insane record-breaking stats this season. For the 3rd time, Sterry Codrington tied his own record for passing touchdowns in a game. Kason Campbell and Manny Diaz each tied the record for touchdown catches in a game with 4, and in the same game, of course. David Tender set the record for rushing touchdowns in the game. Isaac "I-Sack" Negron set his own record with 4 sacks in a game, and Keno Thomas even set the record for longest play from scrimmage with that 98-yard touchdown pass from a couple weeks ago. Tell me, what are some of the most impressive stats you've seen from this season?
I mean, to piggyback off of what you were saying about Kason with 4 touchdown catches in 1 game, he's leading the league right now in all major receiving categories, that being receptions, yards, and receiving touchdowns. Actually, believe it or not, he's actually tied the single season record for receiving touchdowns modern since 2022 with 12, tying Darren Palmer from 2023 of the Las Vegas Sick with it. And it wouldn't surprise anybody if Kason could find the end zone one more time in the last couple of games of the season, let alone the playoffs too. You got to think about that. And then of course you got to talk about Sterry Codrington. We've always known he's been an efficient passer, but he has 22 passing touchdowns this year, and he hasn't thrown a single ball to the opponent's defense, to the defense of the opponent that he's played so far. 22 touchdowns to 0 interceptions is not something you see every day. I mean, it's really not something you see ever.
But wow, between that and I guess we have to say Kason Campbell must be on a Triple Crown watch for the league.
Absolutely. And I mean, of course, we'd have to look at the stats from last year. I believe Ashante was pretty close to getting it last year, but I think Darren Palmer and/or Eric Munchie might have edged him out in terms of receptions in the season. But we have yet to see a true dominant season from a wide receiver, especially Kason Campbell, who many people thought was just the foil to Ashante Worthy. He was just, the wide receiver too, that he'd get looked at when teams would pay attention to Ashante. But no, Kason's making a case. Maybe he's a top dog wide receiver in this BIC offense. And of course, no slight to Ashante Worthy. He's having a great season in his own right. 7 receiving touchdowns, 377 receiving yards, and 18 receptions. But Kason, he's just been on another level this entire season.
He really has. He's made these Sundays very exciting. Cole, you yourself are a huge fan of this league, and I want you to tell me about some of the potential matchups you're looking forward to in this first round.
Well, the great thing about the schedule this year is that not everyone plays everyone, so there might be some teams that don't see each other until the playoffs when it's win or go home season. And the matchup that I'm definitely looking forward to happening, if it does work out, with the East Orange Renegades versus the Patterson U, especially if Quattro Huffin can return. The Patterson U play this style of bully football where they want to ground and pound that rock. They got Willie Easterling, hard body, in the short yardage, they got D-Train. You're not stopping him. 4 tries from the 2-yard line, you just run it with D-Train, he'll find the way in the end zone. But on the other side of that, you have the Renegades D-line. You got Megatron, you got Damon Small, you got Samad Session. All those guys are like 6'3" at least. And that O-line versus D-line matchup is extremely interesting. And I think another part of that is the U, they're only 2-2 on the year, and I really don't think that their record shows how good they are. And similarly, the Renegades have 2 losses this year, and they're both in overtime due to failed championship points. The receiver catches that ball against BIC. BIC dropped to 5-1. That puts the Renegades at 4-1. And then if the Renegades could have scored on their championship points in overtime against the Watchmen, that puts the Watchmen at 3-2, and that puts the Renegades at 5-0. The Renegades are 2 passes away from being 5-0, so I think 3-2 is a very deceiving record for any team that's going to come at them in the playoffs.
Championship points once again poking their head and proving that they will ultimately decide what could be inches separating teams in this league. Cole, I wanted to thank you again for your time, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, Zach and Cole. We've dug into the numbers. We've dug into the headlines. The only thing we can do now is dig in for some football as we get ready for Week 6 here in the A7FL. For all of us here, I'm Matt Ryan saying so long, farewell, and see you on the field. This has been A7FL in motion.